is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. This is episode 88. Today is January 5th, 2022. And joining me from the other side of Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. What is up?
Happy New Year's, everybody. It's a new year, which means it's going to be a new podcast. We'll get into, I haven't actually discussed any of this with Imy yet off camera, but I think we're going to have some new goals that we want to reach here in terms of overall reach, number of subscribers to our channel, and just overall product. I think the more fan involvement that we can get, the better that will make our product, because the more fan involvement, that means more feedback. And that will help us to continually improve these podcasts and make them. We want to talk about, we have stuff that we want to talk about. We have an agenda, right? But we also want to talk about what you guys want to hear. And that's how we're going to grow the most. So we'll get into all that stuff maybe at a later date. But it's a new year. We have the NFL playoffs literally right around the corner. So I'm locking in. I have a Vegas trip next weekend for Super Wildcard weekend. So I'm locking in on that. And we have some other fun stuff that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be doing our Week 18 picks. However, a shortened version. We could, condense the amount of games, because only, some of them don't really matter that much now. And then we'll be doing our playoff tiers, the teams that we think will end up in the playoffs. There are 3 spots left. We'll be telling you guys how we think they stack up. But before we get to all that, we have an NBA segment that we're going to do, and we talked about it on the last episode. It's our all-star ballots for the East and the West. Now, I only did the starters. However, I'm open to discussing reserves, but I think we could discuss that more in depth at a later time. But I'll do whatever you want to do. But I think we should start with the starters. So why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Okay. So for the East, I have Trae Young, DeMar DeRozan, Kevin Durant, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Joel Embiid. And those last 3 I had as locks. Like I highlighted them, like they absolutely have to be in the starting lineup in my mind.
I had the same thing. Great minds think alike. That's how it's been for a long time on this podcast. And we're starting off 2022 the same way that we ended 2021, where we picked all the same teams in all the games last weekend and had the same record. Trae Young, I'll start with him. I know the Hawks have had their struggles. They haven't been, atop the East. They're not really winning the amount of games you think they would. However, he's still having a fantastic season. He's carrying their offense. He is second in the league in scoring at 28.4 points per game, third in assists at 9.5 assists per game, and he's the only player in the league to rank in the top 5 in both major statistical categories, points and assists. In this last 10-game stretch, he is averaging about 35.6 points per game, 9.7 assists, and he's shooting 48.7% from the field. So he's being really efficient as well. He's also shooting close to 40% from 3 this year at 38%. That's really good. So he's been the heart and soul of their team this year. I think, there are some debates you can have. However, I think he fits the bill for one of the starting guards in the East. Now, the other starting guard in the East is DeMar DeRozan. He's been absolutely fantastic. A lot of GMs were outspoken around the league about how they weren't sure or weren't really sold on the DeMar DeRozan to Chicago move and that fit. However, all those people are wrong, or they have been at least to this point. He's averaging about 27 points per game, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, shooting close to 50% from the field. And the surprising part is he's shooting 37% from three, just about. So it seems to be an improved part of his game. And he's recently just become the first player in NBA history to hit game-winning shots on consecutive days, New Year's Eve and then New Year's Day. So the only other player in NBA history that's actually hit buzzer beater game winners in consecutive games was Larry Bird way back in the 80s. But this guy, DeMar DeRozan, did it on consecutive days. He also leads the NBA in fourth quarter scoring, and he's been great in the clutch this season. He ranks second in clutch scoring, just behind his fellow all-star starter, Joel Embiid. So that tells you all you need to know about the season DeMar DeRozan is having, and the Bulls are winning. So you can't use that argument either. Now, the others I think are locks. As you said, Kevin Durant, I mean, he's having an MVP type season, even without Kyrie Irving and all the drama that's gone on there in Brooklyn, it seems. He just continues to be the Kevin Durant that we all love and we all know, averaging close to 37.7 rebounds, 5.7 assists, 51% from the field, 38% from three. He leads the NBA in scoring, and quite frankly, on a night-to-night basis, I believe he's the best player in the entire league. So he's got to be there. And then Giannis, we all know, coming off his first championship, the Bucks have sort of had their ups and downs, but they've got it going as of late. He's averaging about 28, 11 and a half rebounds, shooting 53% from the field. And his per 36-minute numbers, a little bit more advanced statistics here, they're fantastic. He's averaging 31 points per 36 minutes. And if he finishes the season like he's on pace to do, he would become the first player in NBA history to average 30 plus points per game per 36 minutes in 4 consecutive seasons. The only other player to do that more than 3 times was Michael Jordan. However, he didn't do it in 4 consecutive seasons. So he would be the first player to accomplish that feat. Very impressive for Giannis. He continues to be one of the best players on the other side of the ball as well on defense. So he deserves to be there. And then Joel Embiid. He's having great season as well. He's really heated up as of late. 26.5 points per game, about 11 rebounds. He's just doing Joel Embiid type things, and he's shooting 40% from beyond the arc. So he's being really efficient there. I believe he's a top 3 player in the Eastern Conference on a night-to-night basis, and he leads the entire NBA in clutch scoring. So there's that too. And he's had to deal with all the 76ers drama as well. So I think we agree here. Those are my NBA Eastern Conference All-Star starters as of today.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I agree with everything you said there. I mean, DeMar DeRozan, the 2 buzzer beaters he had, I think last week. I mean, he was, I think, the first player in NBA history to hit buzzer beaters on back-to-back nights. Because I think Larry Bird needed a night of rest in between to do it, but still, first ever to do that, which is rare in the NBA, considering that's 75 years of basketball, and that's never been done before.
Right.
And I mean, you could make the argument for Zach LaVine being a starter as well, but just for the like true point guard dynamic, I think Trae Young fits the bill, and he's also been fantastic the entire season. A lot of the Hawks struggles have been not his fault. I mean, obviously he has his struggles on the defensive end, but for the most part, I think a lot of the nights where they're losing, it's not on him. I mean, even a few nights ago where they lost to, I don't even remember who they lost to, but he dropped 56 points. So he's putting up these kind of numbers in losses, which is still commendable at the very least. But I do want to bring up a conversation around making an all-star ballot, which is positions. As you know, the last few years, the NBA, there's been a movement for positionless basketball. But at the same time, these pillars of the old NBA, these like positions and structure of the all-star game and all NBA teams have remained the same. So it's making this kind of thing much harder than it needs to be, in my opinion. For just looking at this, I mean, DeMar DeRozan, he's not a guard anymore if we're really making it technical. He doesn't play the guard. He hasn't played guard for the last 3 or 4 seasons even. And you can attest to that since you're a Spurs fan. You watched him on a nightly basis. But little things like that. The positions is why I had to leave a few guards off the list in both conferences. This is a guard-centric league. So there's a lack of forward talent, especially with the absence of Kawhi Leonard this season. And that's really showing because there's a lot of guys that had to be in here at the forward spots that I didn't really think deserved to be there over some of the guards that missed out. So I do want to go over my reserves real quick for the Eastern Conference before we move on to the West. So 6, I have Zach LaVine, pretty self-explanatory. You can make an argument for him being a starter, like I said. 7, I have James Harden. I'd say he's 80% back to himself, which is, I mean, with his playmaking ability, he's still an all-star caliber player. I mean, he's still, 22 and I think 11 assists on solid efficiency. He still gets to the line. He's still a threat, most of all. And he's just running that offense. And then Jason Tatum, he was a little bit of a tough one, but since there wasn't that many forwards that competed with him that I thought deserved it over him, he had to be there. He benefited from, I think, Jimmy Butler having missing a lot with injuries. He just got injured the other night. He injured his ankle, and he's I tried to research his timetable, but it hasn't come out yet. So with Jimmy Butler missing all the time that he did, and with Julius Randle struggling, I put Jason Tatum in, which is fine. He's still an all-star caliber player. 9, I have Jared Allen. He's the defensive anchor of this Cavs team, and he's become more than just a rim runner. He has developed a little bit of footwork around the basket. He has a nice touch around the rim. And if you look at a guy like Rudy Gobert, it's very similar to that type of thing. The Cavs have one of the best defensive ratings ever with Allen, Mobley, and I believe Okoro on the floor together. And I believe one of those guys had to be rewarded with one of these spots, and I believe Allen deserved it the most. 10, I put Jimmy Butler. Like I said, the injury makes this a little bit more tough, but I put a star next to his name, and I put Julius Randle and a question mark next to his name, just in case if Jimmy Butler were to miss the All-Star game. That would be the guy that I would have first on the list to replace him. And then 11, Darius Garland, 12, LaMelo Ball. For Darius Garland, I just think if I were to leave him off the list, it would be like putting DeAndre Jordan in the All-Star game, but leaving out Chris Paul. Like these guys work in tandem, and if one guy is going to be there, the other has to be as well. That's the way I see it. I mean, he's averaging 19 points per game, 7 assists, career highs all across the board. And he's leading this upstart Cavs team. He orchestrates that offense. And then LaMelo Ball, I had a tough time with the last spot because Drew Holiday, Bradley Beal, Fred VanVleet, those are guys that I think would be very deserving of the nod. But I did go with LaMelo Ball because that's who I think the coaches and that's who I think the NBA would want in the game. It's very similar to the Zion situation from was that last year? That feels like a long time ago. I think it was last year where Zion was in the game. And maybe like a veteran would have been in his place normally.
Okay. I did not prepare my reserves, but I'm sure we'll address this again before the starters are actually, or the rosters are actually announced.
Right.
And we can get to it then. But for now, we'll avoid tangents, we'll save time, and we'll move on to the West. I'll start with my Western Conference starters. Now, you talked about, I think you brought up a great point with the whole positionless basketball thing and the way the NBA is moving, and that's certainly all true. It's a great point to make. However, you mentioned how the All-Star game does it, and it's been tradition for so many years, and it's it has a certain structure, and we all understand that. However, for my ballot, it may not, I guess, I don't know what the word is, apply. Like, it may not fit that mold perfectly, but it's my ballot. So That's what it is. Okay, the obvious guys, Steph Curry. Let's start with him first. He's got to be in here. 27 points per game, 6 assists, 5 rebounds, shooting 42% from 42% from the field, 39% from 3, breaking all sorts of records as of late. I believe he just broke his own record for number of consecutive games making at least one 3-pointer. It was previously 157, and now he set a new one at 158. Maybe it's grown larger since then. I know they were playing tonight against the Dallas Mavericks on national television.
Right.
But I was looking through Twitter, and I love stats. That's why Emmy calls me the Stat King. If you're new to this podcast, and there was a tweet out there by someone, I don't remember his name, but give him credit. Steph Curry in the calendar year 2021. So we know 2021 just ended. We've introduced a new year, 2022. However, in that year, and I know he was it last year that he was dealing with some of those injuries? So we know, January to December is what we're talking about here, regardless. He played in 91 total games in that calendar year. The Warriors did not make the playoffs last year, so not as many games as you think. In those games that he played, and I know a lot of it can be attributed to this year because the Warriors weren't that great last year. However, the Warriors are 61-30. Okay. In the 91 games, he averaged over 30 points, 30.7 points per game, shot 50, 40, 90 over that span of 91 games, 55% from the field, 42% from 3, 91% from the line. Okay. In those 91 games, he had 49 30-point games, 16 40-point games, 4 50-point games, and he also set a new career high, scoring 62 once. Okay. So he had 49 30-point games, 16 40-point games, 4 50-point games, and 1 60-plus point game. His new career high, 62 points. I forget who it came against. And to add to all that, 50, 40, 90, averaging over 30 points, having all those games, very impressive, these averages. He was an all-star starter. He was all NBA first team. He was a 3-time NBA player of the month. He was the scoring champion of last season, and he won the three-point contest to go along with all that. So what a year for Steph Curry. He just continues to amaze. He definitely deserves to be here. I know that was a little bit of a tangent, but he deserves it.
Right.
At my other guard spot, I have John Morant. Why? Because the Grizzlies are winning games. Right now, they're 25-14, 5 full games ahead of the Denver Nuggets for the 4th seed in the West. He's averaging 25, 6.7 assists, 5.7 rebounds, shooting 49% from the field and 40% from three. And as of late, he's gone ballistic. And he's been the best player on the floor in some of these games against more high-profile teams. So if you like the winning argument, you can certainly use that here. It applies to John Morant. And just a random stat I found because I love this kind of stuff. NBA players to score 600-plus points, have 150-plus assists, shoot 48% or better from the field, and shoot 40% or better from three through the first 25 games of the season. Steph Curry in 2015-2016, which I believe was the year he won his unanimous MVP. LeBron James in 2017-2018, and then John Morant this year. That is it. I know it's a little bit of an obscure stat, and it's a mouthful, it's a lot to remember, but I just found that very impressive. He's been very impressive. Other guards certainly have an argument to be here, but for my personal ballot, I put John Morant in there because I believe what he's doing as of late and the team success that the Grizzlies are having supports that. LeBron James, of course, some people say he's washed. He's been hurt some. The Lakers have been struggling. However, he's still averaging 28.5 points per game, 7.4 rebounds per game, 6.5 assists per game. I can go on and on. Shooting over 50% from the field. He's actually shooting 37% from three. But all that aside, he's in his 19th season. He just turned 37. And his points per game average to 28.6 points per game. That's his highest since 2009, 2010. Shooting 52% from the field. That's his highest field goal percentage since 2017, 2018. And shooting 37% from three. That's his highest since 2013, 2014. So just a lot of impressive feats here. He's still going strong at the age of 37 in his 19th season in the NBA. And as long as injuries don't slow him down and he stays healthy, who knows how much longer he'll be playing in the league. I think he's well deserving of the spot, still a top 3 player in the league on most nights. And then we get down to the last 2 spots, and this is where it was somewhat tough for me. I think Nikola Jokic is certainly deserving of one of the spots, averaging about 26 points per game, 14 rebounds, shooting 56% from the field. His three-point percentage has come down a little bit, but he leads the league in a lot of advanced metrics. I won't go on that tangent. Just know that he leads the league in the one you're probably most familiar with, player efficiency rating. He's number 1 in the NBA in that metric. And the Nuggets, without Jamal Murray, without Michael Porter Jr., they're having a certain level of success. They're still 5th in the Western Conference, still somewhat dangerous team when Jokic is on the floor. They're actually 24 points per 100 possessions better when Jokic is on the floor than when he's off the floor. That is astounding to me. So I certainly think he deserves one of the spots. Still a great player coming off his MVP campaign of last year. Nikola Jokic. And then this is where it gets sort of, I guess, iffy with the whole positional situation. I put Rudy Gobert in here. 15 points per game, 15 rebounds per game. He leads the NBA in field goal percentage, but not only does he lead the league in field goal percentage, he leads the league in total rebounds, rebounds per game, defensive rebounds, field goal percentage, rebound percentage, effective field goal percentage, true shooting percentage, win shares per 48 minutes, offensive win shares, and defensive win shares. I'll leave it at that. So there are certainly as we know, it's the Wild Wild West. There are many arguments you can make, but that's my ballot as of today.
Okay. Yeah. We actually have a couple of disagreements on your list, but I can definitely see where you're coming from with those guys for sure. Here's where my list is at. Stephen Curry, LeBron James, and Nikola Jokic all remain the same. Those are my three that I had locked in. At that 2 spot, I went back and forth with Donovan Mitchell and John Morant. And I ended up going with Donovan Mitchell, but it doesn't take away at all what John Morant has done this year. I mean, he is a MVP candidate. And if he's not on your list right now for MVP, he should be there, 100%. But for me, Donovan Mitchell, he's leading the best offensive team in the league by a mile if you look at offensive rating. And he's also improved his efficiency around the rim with his little floater game as well. And for the first time in his career, he's actually above league average, finishing around the rim, which has really helped his efficiency a lot. And it's tough when it's kind of splitting hairs with John Morant and Donovan Mitchell. And to me, you can't go wrong with either. So that's the bottom line. And then at my 4th spot, I actually put in Draymond Green at the 4. And I put Draymond Green / Paul George. But Paul George is injured at the moment, so it's kind of up in the air. So Draymond Green, in my mind, is by far and away the defensive player of the year in my mind. He's been the on-court coach for this team for a long time, but this year it's a bit of a revelation or recollection of some of his prior skills that he had in those past championship runs. He's really gotten back to really being focused night after night after night. And he's been elite on the defensive end in every facet of the game, switching on pick and rolls. I mean, orchestrating everybody on the court, just being the voice that these young guys can listen to on the defensive end. So I think Draymond Green is an all-star somewhere. But I definitely see where you're coming from with Rudy Gobert for sure. I'm going to get into my reserves really fast. 6, I have John Morant, self-explanatory. 7, Devin Booker, also self-explanatory. Career highs in 3-point percentage, having a really solid year. 8, I have Karl Anthony Towns. I had a little bit of a tough time with the centers right here. You'll see why. Number 9, I have Rudy Gobert / DeAndre Ayton. And the reason I have DeAndre Ayton there is I feel like he's not getting the credit he deserves. It's not necessarily like I think he's going to make it, but in my mind, I think he should be there considered in that mix. He's the backbone of that defense around the rim. He's been fantastic defensively, and he's also become their key front court guy on the offensive end. So whichever you want to put there, I can definitely see both arguments. Number 10, I have Paul George / Draymond Green again. I had that same thing in the starters. If you remember, pretty self-explanatory there. 11, I have Luka Doncic. He missed some time with injury, kind of started the season slow as well, which is why he's not higher, but I still think he's an all-star. And then 12, I have DeJounte Murray. I'm sure you're going to be really happy with that, but I just think he's deserving of that all-star spot. If you look at all other guards in the West that are up for this spot, like a Chris Paul or Damian Lillard, or even Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, they all have something that's holding them back from being there. Damian Lillard, the shooting struggles to start the year, and as well as his defensive struggles, which matter in my mind. Chris Paul, his free throw percentage is down. His 3-point percentage is down as well. It's down to 32%, I believe, if I remember correctly. But it's not that big of a deal. But I just don't think with 14 points per game averages, you can really have him in there with that those shooting splits down a little bit. But yeah, that's it. Well, what do you think of that of having DeJounte in there over those guys? I'm sure that's going to spark a conversation.
Well, I think, in a broader sense, I think he's deserving. I mean, what he's done, how he's improved year to year. I believe he has like 6 or 7 triple doubles this season. And when the Spurs have had him on the floor, they haven't as of late, and they've been losing because he's been in COVID protocols. However, when they've had him on the court, he's been their best player. He's been their go-to guy in crunch time. And I think the way he's kept them afloat, the way he's kept them in some of these games, both not only on the offensive end, in some of the areas he's improved there, but on the defensive end, the effort that he gives on a night-to-night basis and some of the numbers that he's been putting up, I think he's deserving. Do I think he will actually get there? Probably not. But I can definitely see and respect why you have him there. And I certainly think that if he gets there, it'll be one of the last, spots, because he doesn't necessarily have some of the gaudy numbers that some of the other guards in the West have. However, if you look at his overall numbers, I believe he's top 5 in the league in assists. If I believe he's averaging close to 9 assists. I believe he's averaging around 18, 19 points per game.
19.
Almost 19 points per game. And I think he's certainly racking up the rebound statistics as well. He's averaging near close to triple-double. He needs to get, I've talked about some of this previously on my Spurs mini-series. He needs to get more consistent on the offensive end with his jump shot, especially on, beyond the arc. If he can do that, that will really take him to the next level. However, he has improved in that area. It's not to say, he hasn't improved, since over the past couple of years. But he's definitely matured. He's a really good defensive player, and he has been ever since he really came into the league. And he's improving on the offensive end. And I believe he has one of the best, if not the best, assist to turnover ratio, or he did at one point in the entire NBA. So that just shows maturity. He's learning the game. And of course, when you have a coach like Popovich, that's not necessarily hard to do. However, give him credit. I think he's deserving. Do I think he'll get there? Eventually, maybe not this year. Just because I think winning matters. And the Spurs, while they did have a good December, they've been struggling as of late. I'm just not sure he'll get enough respect league-wide to actually get in. But it's certainly a conversation.
Right. And I will say this. I think right now I would put it in, but in a month it could be an entirely different conversation. I think Dame could definitely play his way in. And I think also Chris Paul could also play his way in with how he will play over the next month. So it's worth looking at, but we will see what happens. But with that, we will move on to our NFL segment here. So it is week 18.
Before we do that, DeJounte Murray returned from the COVID list tonight, and they beat Boston on the road. He scored 22 and had 12 assists with 9 rebounds. So that just goes perfectly into that conversation.
Right.
But yes, with that, let's move on to the NFL.
It is week 18, ladies and gentlemen. The final regular season games of the year, with a lot on the line for a lot of these teams. Even with some of the top teams in these conferences, if they lose and other teams win, they could drop out of home playoff game positioning. So a lot on the line here. But let's get right into it. The first game on the docket is going to be Saturday afternoon. Chiefs visiting Mile High to play the Broncos, favored minus 10.5.
Okay. So the Chiefs lost last week to the Bengals. What a great game that was. They fell out of the number 1 position in the AFC. The Titans now own that position. If the Titans win this week, they will get that number 1 seed in the only first round bye in the conference. However, if the Titans somehow lose to, I believe it's Houston this week, and Kansas City can win this game, which I believe they will, because they are just the better team. And I believe after being humiliated on defense last week, I think Pagan, or what's his face, the defensive coordinator, Steve Spagnuolo,
Yep.
Will have the Chiefs ready to play. The question for me is this Denver running game. How effective is it going to be? They are playing at home. They don't really have much to play for because they are eliminated, and they have a problem at quarterback right now with Drew Lock in that position. However, a lot of people believe that if they can get the quarterback right, which they haven't been able to do since Peyton Manning left, let's just be honest. But if they can get the right quarterback in there, and GMs around the league believe they're going to be aggressive in going after the Aaron Rodgers of the world, possibly the Russell Wilson. He's voiced interest in wanting to be in Denver, but has also recently voiced, as of late, wanting to remain in Seattle. So it's just kind of all over the place. But the point is, a lot of people believe if they can get the right star quarterback, this team's ready to win a Super Bowl because they have the pieces defensively. They just drafted a really good player in Patrick Surtain on that outside in that secondary. The question for me is, how effective will Denver Broncos running game be? Because if they can run the ball effectively and, convert in the red zone, I believe they can keep this game closer than people think. So the question is, I think the Chiefs will win. I think they'll be the 2 seed, if not the 1 seed. However, I think it's most likely they end up the 2 seed because I do not foresee the Titans losing to the Texans this weekend. So I'm going to say the Chiefs win. However, I think the Broncos run the ball pretty effectively, and they try a little harder than people think they're going to. They're at home, playing at Mile High one last time. I think they'll keep it within that 10.5 point range. I'll take the home dogs, big home dogs, which has been a pretty effective bet so far this season. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm right with you there. I mean, looking at the Chiefs and the way their pass rush has operated over this last half of the season, I mean, it's something to be reckoned with. Like, you have to keep your eye on it. It's clear to me Frank Clark is back to himself. Chris Jones back in the middle of that defensive line is right where he wants to be, playing at an extremely high level. And then their pickup, what's his name? Ingram. Wait, is it Ingram?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
You're right, Ingram. So it gives them basically a big 3 collectively as a pass rush that really pushes in quarterbacks on all sides. And it gives them a dynamic that they haven't had previously. So they are the team to beat in the AFC in my mind, whether Tennessee wins or not, whether they're in the 2 seed or not. I just think they're the team to beat, and I think they'll take care of business. I'm going to pick them to cover.
Okay. Next game. By the way, that game's on Saturday afternoon. This game's Saturday night. Your Dallas Cowboys -7.5 at a COVID-riddled Philadelphia Eagles team that's already clinched the playoffs, a wild card spot, and really doesn't have all that much to play for. So what do you think? I'll let you go first because it's your team, the Dallas Cowboys.
Well, just thinking about who's going to play in this game, it's really hard to know what to expect. Because Micah Parsons, I just saw reports that he's out in COVID protocols, and his status for the game is up in the air, and it could happen to pretty much anybody on the team from now until Saturday. So it's hard to really know. But what I will say is Jerry Jones did come out and say that the Cowboys will be playing their starters that are available and will be playing to win. So I think based on that, I'm going to pick the Cowboys to cover, just going off of what I know and who will play, because the Eagles, it just seems like more and more and more go into the COVID protocols at each hour that passes. So just based off of that uncertainty, I have to pick the Cowboys here to cover.
I do too. I think always in these last week of the season games where playoff seeds are on the line, playoff bursts are on the line, you'll always have to go with the team that has more to play for. And I think Dallas has a lot to gain this weekend. You mentioned what Jerry Jones said, and I think he's right. They should do that. They can still, I don't know the exact scenario, but they can still get the number 2 seed. And that has its advantages. You don't get, a first round bye like you used to, but you still get, if you can win that wild card game, you still get an extra home game. And that's beneficial, especially for a team like the Cowboys, which at least this season, they've been very effective, with the exception of last week, playing at home. They seem to be very comfortable playing there. And of course, the crowd noise and all that plays a much bigger factor come playoff time. So I think, as I said, more to play for. I know losing Michael Gallup probably hurts, tearing his ACL. We hope he has a fast and speedy recovery. We'll talk about we can talk about some of the bigger picture concerns later when we do our tiers lists, because there certainly are some, I would say. However, Philly's, I think, too COVID riddled. They're resting up. They need to get healthy. I think that's what they're focused on. They're in. I don't think many expected them to be here in the first place. I certainly didn't. And I'll be the first to admit that I was wrong about that. But yes, I do think after last week, the Cowboys want to right some things. They have a little bit of a bad taste in their mouth after that, and I think they will. And I'm going to take them to cover the spread here against the Philadelphia Eagles. Dak, say what you want about him, whether he's in a slump and all this crap. I don't believe in any of that. I think this is just who he is, and who he is a guy that dominates against the NFC East. Go look up his numbers against the NFC East. They're absolutely incredible. So I think he'll do that, and he'll get on the right track before the playoffs, and Dallas will win this game by more than a touchdown.
Right, exactly. So moving on to the Colts favored -15.5 visiting the Jacksonville Jaguars. And this is a game that has a lot of implications for your Steelers, as well as the Baltimore Ravens, and of course the team playing, the Indianapolis Colts. So with all that into account, I mean, I'll let you go first since your team.
It's interesting. History suggests that Jacksonville could very well win this game. They're actually 5-0 in the last 5 years at home against the Indianapolis Colts. Now, the Colts have had some quarterback instability in those years. They had Phillip Rivers last year, and they had the years where they were dealing with Jacoby Brissett and a a bunch of other guys, and they didn't really have this version of Jonathan Taylor at that particular point in time. Last week was actually the first week this season where Jonathan Taylor went over 100 yards rushing and they lost the game, which was fairly surprising to me. And we'll get to the Raiders later. I mean, holy shit. Excuse my language. But look, will I be rooting for the Colts? No, because it affects the potential playoff livelihood of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I do think I have to pick them to win this game. Now, by how much? Who knows? I do not know what to expect from Jacksonville. I believe I picked them as underdogs last week. Or no, I didn't. It was against New England. But they were in the same situation last week, 15.5-point underdogs to the Patriots on the road. And they got absolutely mowed down, blown off the field, whatever you want to say. And I think a veteran team like the Colts, they're going to respond after losing a game last week in which I don't think they really expected to have Carson Wentz playing. I think they'll win. And I do think, well, you know what? Just from pure hope, I'm going to pick Jacksonville to cover because Jacksonville did play Indianapolis close early this year, only lost to them by about 7 points, I think, in Indianapolis. And I do think Jacksonville will play well here. It's a division rival. I do think there's somewhat of a motivation here to maybe spoil the Colts season, season in which they started slow and then have ramped it up here in the past 13 weeks, 9-4. All 4 of those losses coming by one score or less. I'm going to pick the Jacksonville Jaguars to cover. That could hurt me, but it really doesn't matter at this point. Take the Colts to win, probably lock up a playoff spot, but I won't be surprised if it's close, and I sure hope it is close because then who knows what will happen. That creates chaos, and we love chaos.
Right, exactly. God love the chaos unless it involves your team. But yeah, I'm gonna pick the Jaguars to cover, but definitely not for the same reasons. I think, I just think I struggle to believe that the Jaguars are going to find enough scoring to keep it close, but I still do think there's enough talent on the Jaguars defense to slow down Carson Wentz a little bit, which is, I think, where the Steelers have their best hope. I mean, if Carson Wentz goes out and lays a stinker, I think there's a scenario there where if Carson Wentz throws 2 picks and maybe loses a fumble, the Jaguars could mess around and win. So I'm going to pick the Jaguars to cover, just thinking that they'll be able to force a turnover here and there. Whether they'll be able to stop Jonathan Taylor is a whole different story. I don't know if they will, but 15.5 is still huge. So I'm gonna still pick them to cover.
Okay. So with that, we move on to an important game in the AFC in terms of wild card implications. AFC North Division rival, possibly the best rivalry in all of the NFL. My Steelers at the Ravens. Baltimore -4.5. A line that I really don't understand, but nevertheless, we won't get into that. Look, last week, the Ravens had no good reason for losing that game against the Rams, in my opinion. However, the reason they lost, I mean, they ran for 165 yards. The defense forced 3 Matthew Stafford turnovers. They only allowed the Rams to convert 3 out of 9 third downs. But, 2 of those 3 takeaways, they could only turn those into field goals. And against a high-powered offense like the Rams and the well-coached team, they ultimately weren't able to get the job done. In Baltimore, it's hard to gauge what I'm going to get week to week. It's also hard to gauge what I'm going to get week to week from Pittsburgh because they've been totally different team, like the Cowboys, at home playing at Heinz Field and playing on the road. The past 3 road games have all been blowouts. The Vikings game, the Chargers game, and of course the Chiefs game. I know they made the Vikings game close, but that game was dominated. Let's not, trip here. That game was dominated by the Vikings for the most part. So these are 2 teams, really hard to gauge. The Steelers need a little less help to get into the playoffs at this particular moment in time than the Ravens do. It's a real long shot for the Ravens, still a pretty long shot for the Steelers. Given what I know about this rivalry, though, and given what I saw, the changes on the offensive line this past week for the Steelers with their new offensive line coach, given that the offensive line coach that had been this season moved on to greater and greener pastures to become an assistant coach at Oregon under Dan Lanning. Given what I saw from Najee Harris, the way they were able to run the ball, I do think they'll be able to do some of that. And I think they'll be able to hit maybe a couple more bigger, more explosive plays against this banged up Baltimore secondary. And I mean, come on now. I have to believe that TJ Watt is on a mission to just wreck the entire league at some point, especially when he plays on prime time, because in prime time this year he's been absolutely fantastic. And I think the Steelers will be able to generate a pass rush. I still do not know who will be playing quarterback in this game for Baltimore either. So given that, I think it's something crazy like the past 20 matchups, the average margin of victory is like 1 point in this rivalry, something like that crazy. I have to pick the team that has a little bit better of a shot to get into the playoffs and needs a little less help with, I think a little bit greater of a storyline, what they're playing for. Plus 4.5 feels like a really big line here for me, just given the inconsistency of that Baltimore Ravens team. And who knows, the Steelers' road woes might come back to bite them and they might lose this game by more than 4.5 points, but I'm going to pick the Steelers plus 4.5.
Right. I'm right with you there. I think with where these franchises are at, with where these teams are at, I think overall, I think they match up pretty well. And I don't see this game getting out of hand on either side. For the Ravens side, I believe Tyler Huntley is starting, if I'm not mistaken. So from that point of view, I don't feel like the Ravens will just be able to tear it up against the Steelers defense, because they still have a lot of elite players on that side. Minkah Fitzpatrick, TJ Watt, all those guys. And I think they'll be able to keep them in the low 20s range scoring wise. So I see this game as being like a 23-20 type of game. And whoever wins, I think it's just kind of a coin flip.
Yeah.
So
that's how it's been. That's the Ravens Steelers. That's why it's a great rivalry. So certainly I think Najee Harris running for 188 yards against the Browns on Monday night and the Steelers being on a short week, whether or not they can replicate that sort of effort is still to be seen. I just think Baltimore it's just not their year. They've been way too banged up, especially in the secondary, down to guys off the streets, basically. But we'll see. It's certainly a long shot for both teams, but here the Ravens are losing their last, I believe, 5 games, and they're still in a position. They still have hopes to get into a wild card spot. And the Steelers was with the rebuilding offensive line, a statue, aging quarterback like Ben Roethlisberger, and a defense that at times of the season hasn't been the same, especially against the run. And here they are, one game above 500, with a chance to get into the playoffs in the last week. So certainly two really good franchises that are just having somewhat of down seasons. But we can get into all of that in the offseason. Let's move on to our next game. That would be the Tennessee Titans minus 10.5 at Houston. We've seen that Derrick Henry has returned to practice. What do you think? What do you think happens here? The Titans have a chance to lock up home field advantage throughout the playoffs. But do they win by 10.5 or I guess 11 points or more in your opinion?
No, I do not. I don't see them winning by more than 10. And here's why. I think they're gonna ease Derrick Henry back a little bit. I don't think they're gonna give him over 20 carries in the first game back. I could be wrong about that, but just with the way their season has been, I think they're gonna try to ease him back a little bit, give him about 15 to 20 carries instead of the 25 carry range that he's normally at. On top of that, I think this Texans defense has actually been playing at a very respectable level these last few weeks in particular, forcing turnovers, being just pesky, still not that talented, but still at the same time able to get the job done at a pretty respectable clip. So with the Tennessee offense not being crazy explosive, they're still very good as an offense overall, but I just don't think they're going to put up 35 points in this game. I see this game as more as like a 27-17 type of game.
Right. I agree with you. I picked the Texans last week. I think we both did. It was kind of the same situation, 12.5 point underdogs to the Niners. They were in that game for most of it, but then the Niners got a couple scores late, and that kind of did us in on that one. But I think they were able to hang tough with the Niners for most of that game, first three quarters, until the Niners ultimately pulled away. I think Davis Mills is certainly a capable guy. And we've seen that this season. In Houston, and I know it has a lot to do with perpetually being double-digit underdogs because they're just not that great of a team right now. And they have, they're rebuilding. But they're very respectable against the spread this season for what they are. They're 7-9 against the spread. So I do think their defense has been playing pretty well. And given that the Titans, and I'll get to this later, but I believe, they've won 11 games this season, but only by a combined 62 points. Their point differential isn't that great. And they're 5-2 in one score games. So we'll talk more about that later. But they do have a very improved defense. And I think given that I believe, lost to Houston last time, right? Earlier in the season, they're going to be wanting to get back and, lock up that one seed and bye. I just think Houston's going to make it a lot more competitive than people think.
Right. Exactly. Okay, moving along here to where are we at? Okay, Carolina at Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay favored minus 7.5. I'll start off here. I think this spread is really small. I know Tampa Bay may not be playing a lot of starters, and they have a lot of guys out with injury. But at the same time, I just think the better team shows itself, I think at the end of the day, this team is going to be able to run the ball, and whoever's in there at quarterback for the majority of the game is going to be protected. and that matters. The Carolina can't say the same thing on the other side. Their offensive line is porous, which is not a word I use often. I mean, their offense is so incompetent to where I'd say if Kyle Trask ends up playing, I still think the Buccaneers would cover. So I'm picking the Buccaneers here. Pretty straightforward. Not much else really to say there.
Yeah, I think the Bucks have more to play for than people think.
Right.
They can no longer get the 1 seed because, of course, Green Bay has that locked up now. But they can still get that 2 seed in those 2 home playoff games, and they've been really good at home this season. They're 6-1. I do think we're going to see the starters for at least a good portion of the game, so that they can possibly secure that number 2 seed. However, I do think it would require. It says here, according to the Athletic, for them to move to the 2 seed, it would require the Cowboys to beat the Eagles and then a loss by either the Rams or the Cardinals. So it's not that far-fetched, I guess. I definitely see those things falling into place. And they're just, as you said, overall a better team. And the quarterback carousel continues in Carolina. And I know that's more of an off-season conversation that we're going to have. But remember, this Panthers team, they were 5-5 going into mid-November. But now 6 straight losses, their season has been derailed, and they don't have a quarterback. They have 2 quarterbacks, but when you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. And that's really their problem. And then, as you mentioned, their offensive line certainly has its fair share of struggles too. So look for the Buccaneers coming off a little bit of a shaky game against lower competition to get right for the playoffs here and dominate a division rival. Take the Buccaneers -7.5, and I'm actually going to make that my lock of the week.
Okay, yeah. That's a solid pick, I think. Moving along, though, to the Patriots at the Miami Dolphins. Pretty interesting game, considering these teams obviously have history, but specifically in this game where they're playing in Miami, Miami has won a lot of their past meetings in Miami for hard to pinpoint what the reason is for that, but nonetheless, the Patriots have struggled in Hard Rock Stadium. So they're favored -6.5. And I think despite all of that history that I just mentioned, I still have to pick the Patriots to cover, just based on where these football teams are at. Just from a X's and O standpoint, the Patriots match up right now with their strengths match up with all of the Dolphins' weaknesses. And that's with their methodical offense, not turning the ball over. Miami really relies on getting interception and getting those turnovers a lot of the time. And also with their defense, Matt Judon rushing the passer, Kyle Van Noy rushing the passer, Christian Barmore getting an interior rush on a smaller quarterback like Tua Tagovailoa. And just overall, this team is a entirely different team than they were back in week 1 when they lost to this Miami team by 1. So I expect a much different result. And this is going to be my lock of the week. I'm picking the Patriots.
Okay. I think I agree with you. When you look at New England, they got back on the right track last week, absolutely thumped Jacksonville. Matt Jones threw for 3 touchdown passes, didn't throw an interception or turn the ball over for that matter. He had a little bit of a slump the previous couple of weeks where he had 4 interceptions over the past 2 weeks before last week. But as you mentioned, last week, The Dolphins weren't able to stop the run. You know, they gave up 198 rushing yards to the Titans. And similar to the Titans, the Patriots play a similar style of football, physical, run the football, a little bit of a limited quarterback, but definitely with that combo of running backs that they have, Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris, I expect them to be able to run the ball. And then I expect Mac Jones to play well. And the Dolphins are eliminated. They don't have all that much to play for. And I just believe Patriots are the better team. So I'll take the Patriots -6.5 to cover here against the Dolphins. And not to mention, they still can get the division. They need the Bills to lose to the Jets, but they still can get the division if they win this game. So still something to play for if you're the Patriots.
Okay, next game. The New Orleans Saints visiting the Atlanta Falcons. Saints favored -4.5. And with a win and a 49ers loss against the Rams, the Saints would be in the playoffs, which is just incredible, honestly. And very likely could happen. But with this game, though, I just think it just comes down to, I think the Saints defense will be, like they have been all year, a team on a mission.
Right.
I don't think much of this Saints offense still, but this is the team that knows what they have to do. And that defensive roster is experienced, just disciplined, just sound across the board, and just elite. It's just the word for it, just to put it simply. So given that this team was giving the Super Bowl champion fits just a few weeks ago, I think they'll run circles around this Atlanta Falcons offense. I'm going to pick the Saints to cover here. I think you could see maybe a pick six involved here. I think you could see maybe a punt return, but I just think the Saints will get help to that offense in one way or another.
I agree. Atlanta has nothing to play for at this point. It's not that they're a bad football team, but they're bad situationally. That was proven last week. Josh Allen threw 3 interceptions, and they still lost by 2 touchdowns. I mean, it's not good. They were 1 of 7 on third down, 1 of 4 in the red zone. They're just not that good. They can't stop the run. Devin Singletary, Buffalo ran for over 200 yards last week in a bit of a blizzard. Not a blizzard, but a snowstorm at that. I just don't think the Falcons are all that great of a team. They have talent, but they're not that great of a team. And, Arthur Smith, I don't think he's a bad coach. I don't think you can say that yet, but he certainly has some work to do with Atlanta. And you mentioned it, New Orleans defense has been dominant, especially over the past month. As you mentioned, if they win and the 49ers lose, which I don't think will happen, and I'll explain that later when we get to the Niners-Rams game. I've been really high, or I guess next. I've been really high on the Niners, a little bit higher than some people, and I think I need to stick to that. But certainly think the Saints are the better team here. 5-3 on the road, and they're allowing less than 10 points per game over the past month. Now, it's been a bit of a struggle on the offensive side. They've only gone over 20 points once in the last 6 games, but their defense has been so dominant that hasn't mattered. It's kind of a little bit old school football, if you will. And I think they'll get it done. They're just a better team.
Right, exactly. Moving it right along here. To that aforementioned game, the 49ers visiting the LA Rams in SoFi Stadium. Rams favored -4.5. And I'll start off here. I think this game is no matter which team wins, I think it's going to be a close game. The Rams, they have a lot to figure out offensively. Matthew Stafford has questions to answer, I think. And just not even the questions to answer, just from a confidence standpoint, I think it's really important for him to have a good game this week, heading into the playoffs. And then on the other side, I'm not sure yet who will be starting at quarterback. I believe it is going to be Jimmy Garoppolo. I've heard reports that from the Pat McAfee show, actually, that Jimmy Garoppolo is really pissed off and really wants to play through this injury. But considering that it is a thumb injury and he will have trouble gripping the ball, I actually think they would be better off starting Trey Lance in this game. But with the quarterback situation that the San Francisco 49ers have, I just feel inclined to pick the Rams here. I'm going to pick the 49ers to cover just because I think it's going to be a close game no matter what. But I just think whether a injured Jimmy is in there or rookie Trey Lance is in there, it's going to be tough to overcome this Rams defense.
I can certainly see that. It's going to be a great game. I think it'll be close, like you said. That's why I'm taking the 49ers to cover and hopefully win. I certainly think it's possible if Jimmy G can play and, give credit to Trey Lance. He's played well enough to win the past couple of weeks. When you haven't played, more than 5 football games in your past 2 years, given that he only had one start, I believe it was last year in college or whenever that was, and you've only played so many games over the past 2 years, you can't really expect all that much, although he has been groomed under Kyle Shanahan and Jimmy Garoppolo. I do think the 49ers' physical style of play will match up well with the Rams. I do think they'll keep this game close. Matchup of 2 really good offensive coaches. For my sakes and for this game, I'm going to say they win, but I certainly think that it could certainly end up where the Rams win this game. Possibly, I think they could get the 2 seed as well, and win the NFC West and lock up a home wild card game, which I think would be beneficial for them. But for the sake of what we're going to do here in just a minute with our NFL playoff team tiers list and what teams we want to make the playoffs, or who we think will make the playoffs and be in for next weekend, I have the 49ers winning this game, although I really am not totally confident in that, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
Just because of the quarterback situation. That's all. But you certainly bring up a great point about Matthew Stafford. It hasn't been great, but I'm gonna defend Matthew Stafford here a little bit later. But that's for later. Let's move on.
Right. All right. But I will say that I want the 49ers to make it in just for the sake of the playoffs. I think they would provide a much better matchup for a lot of these higher up teams for sure.
I agree with that.
Moving along.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Yep. Seahawks at Arizona. Arizona favored -6.5, and are still alive in the NFC West. If your scenario takes place where the 49ers do beat the Rams and the Cardinals to win, the Cardinals would be NFC West champs. After all of the talk about, what's wrong with the Cardinals, they could be right back there with the NFC West. So talking about this game, though, I do think they got back right on the right track last week with the performance against the Cowboys. But I think at the same time, they left a little bit of meat on the bone, if you know what I'm saying. Like, I think there were opportunities in that game where they could have closed the door on the Cowboys a little bit more. And in that area, they left a little bit to be desired. But at the same time, a win is a win, and they beat a quality opponent. So with that in my head, I just think the Cardinals are just going to take care of business here. And I'm pretty confident that with the way they stopped this Cowboys running game last week, that they'll be able to stop this one with Rashad Penny and those guys, obviously with a worse offensive line and everything. So I'm going to pick the Cardinals to cover. I just think they're the better overall team, and I just think they have a lot to play for. They know they have to take care of business.
I agree. Not much else to say. When the media and all these other people were talking about what's wrong with the Cardinals, well, what's wrong with the Cardinals? I mean, they're missing DeAndre Hopkins, Rondale Moore, and James Conner. I mean, what do you want them to do? I think ultimately for them, the focus is on not only winning this game but getting healthy for next weekend. And hopefully some of those guys can get healthy and they can get back in the field. That will help. But it was certainly impressive, the game plan they deployed against Dallas and what their defense was able to do. I thought holding Dallas to 3 of 11 on third down, limiting the Cowboys to a season worst 45 rushing yards. Their first win over a team that it was 500 or better since early November. A much needed win, as you said. And I just think as you said, they're the better team. They have more to play for, and that's who you should pick in these games. However, I will say this about Seattle. Last week, it was the offense that we thought we were going to see the entire season. Russell Wilson threw for, I know it was the Lions, but the Lions have been a really competitive team, certainly as of late, and they weren't really all that competitive in this game. Seattle got it together offensively. I do not think they will run the ball as effectively, and that's what you pointed to. I do think Arizona will be able to limit their run game. They won't run for 170 yards and 2 touchdowns again. Rashad Penny won't, for that matter. But Russell Wilson threw for 4 touchdowns last week. It was sort of the explosive offensive attack that we expected to see the entire season. And, it is a division rival. Seattle does not have a first-round pick this year. They traded that away in the Jamal Adams trade. They don't have a lot of draft capital, so it's not really like they're playing for any sort of draft position. I don't think that really matters here. I think they'd love to spoil the division for the Arizona Cardinals, one of their division rivals. So I won't be surprised if it's close, but I think I'll err on the side of safety and pick the better team, the Cardinals, -6.5.
Right. I agree with that. So moving along to the last game, and definitely
this is a playoff game.
Yeah, basically.
This is a playoff game.
Yeah.
Yep. The winner of this game gets a spot in the wild card, for sure, as long as it doesn't end in a tie. We've seen crazier things happen, but I don't think this will. It's a tough game. Give the Raiders credit. I certainly don't think either of us expected them to be where they are currently. Give Derek Carr credit. John Gruden being fired pretty much mid-season. They've had a lot to deal with. Rebuilding offensive line. The defense has certainly improved. They've had a pretty good season. They're sort of hot, if you will. They've won 3 in a row. Their defense is playing really well over the stretch, only allowing 15.7 points per game. And Vegas is going to be hyped because they do get this game at home. But at the same time, over the last 3 weeks, they've had some good fortune. They're -7 in the turnover margin over the 3-game winning streak. They're still finding ways to win. And that can be the sign of a good team, but it can also be the sign of a sloppy, not so good team. And I just think the Chargers, with Justin Herbert and this explosive big play offense, we'll be able to break some of the things that we've seen from this Raiders defense the past couple of weeks. And I think as long as they can stop the Raiders running attack with what's his name, Josh Jacobs, I do believe they'll be able to win this game. I just think I've talked highly of the Chargers this season. It was only a couple weeks ago before that loss to the Texans where I said, I believe that they're a dark horse possible Super Bowl run team just because of Justin Herbert and the explosiveness offensively, and given that the defense at that time was figuring some things out. And I still believe they have one of the best, most underrated defensive players in the league in Derwin James. So they're healthy. Eckler, Mike Williams, and Joey Bosa all recently came off the COVID list. They're finding health before the playoffs, and I just think it's a win-win situation. And I think this game could be close. I think it could come down to the field goal, and if it does, I'll be worried because we know Chargers history of this sort of stuff. It's sort of it's a coin toss sometimes, but they've been pretty solid on the road this year. They've won more games than they lost on the road. I think Brandon Staley's a better coach. He's been in these types of big game situations with the Rams previously, whereas Rich Pistachia hasn't really faced this type of game before. I just think the Chargers are the more explosive, better team, and they'll win this game. Who knows? Maybe it's a field goal, maybe it's a touchdown, but I certainly think it will be close. And if the Raiders win, well, they deserve it.
I'll lead off with this. I'll be cheering for the Chargers on Sunday night for sure. I think their entire body of work over the course of the entire season has been better than what the Raiders have shown. But at the same time, I do think this is going to be an extremely close game because my view of this Chargers defense has definitely changed. I just think outside of Joey Bosa and Derwin James, there's a lot of holes on this defense. I think the Raiders are going to be able to run the ball and control the clock, and they're going to be really smart about time of possession in this game. I think they're going to control the time of possession. And with Derek Carr playing I wouldn't say he's a top 10 quarterback, but right now he's playing like a top 10 quarterback. I'll say that. He's definitely in that 12 to 10 range, somewhere in there. I think the Raiders will cover. I'm not going to say whether they'll win, but I do think this is basically destined to be a very close game, and I think it'll be a very high scoring game as well.
I agree with that. I mean, hopefully we get a classic not Sunday night of the season, but last Sunday night of the regular season. This is certainly the game that you want to have because it's winning in. The winner gets in, the loser goes home. And they're division rivals. So it's certainly going to be fun. But those are our picks for the last week of the season. And for those of you who don't know, next week will commence the NFL playoffs. And next week will be at least one of my favorite, probably one of your favorites as well, favorite episodes of the year, where we preview all 6 wild card games in depth. So that will be sometime next week once we know who actually gets into the playoffs. But based on our picks and based on who we have selected to win, we each composed our NFL playoff team tiers list. So 14 teams make it, 7 in each conference. I have mine basically into 3 tiers with a 4th just for shits and giggles. But I don't know how you split yours up, but I guess we'll just let's just let's read off our list, like the teams that we have in each tier, and then maybe that will spark some interesting conversations.
Okay, yeah. I defined each tier. So for my tier one, to me is what I put was a legit Super Bowl contender and the team/teams to beat in their respective conference. So for that, I had Green Bay, Kansas City, and coming in the back end of this tier, I was kind of back and forth on where I wanted to put this team. I put Tampa Bay. So that might differ from your list because I know you still think really highly of the Rams, but that's currently where I'm at. Where are you at with your tier one?
My tier one, it's Super Bowl. It's called Super Bowl caliber. These are teams that I don't really care about what's been said, what flaws they may have. I mean, you look at, and we'll get to them more detail here in a minute, but certainly Green Bay. I really thought highly of how they've played, even though against the run they haven't been all that great, and they haven't looked as physical as of late. But they have home field. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Then we have Kansas City. Despite some of their shortcomings, I still can envision a scenario where Patrick Mahomes is either playing in the Super Bowl or holding up the Lombardi Trophy at the end of the season. And then Tampa Bay. When Tom Brady is your quarterback, and we've learned this over and over and over again, no matter what is going on in and around that team, you have to put them and give them their ultimate respect, and they should be in this tier because they're the defending champions.
Exactly.
So we have the same group of teams in that tier one.
Right.
Maybe for different reasons, but we still have the same group of teams.
I just want to say, that's exactly where I was at with Tampa Bay as well. Like Tom Brady is the needle for that team. I mean, he sets the standard.
Right.
So with that, we'll move into tier two. Tier two for me was contenders that are matchup dependent or have flaws in certain areas. So for me, that tier started out with the Los Angeles Rams. You can make an argument for them to be in tier one, but for me, it starts with if you take their safety blanket receiver, Cooper Kupp, out of the game, I think that kind of shows kind of the murkier side of this offense. I think obviously they have Odell Beckham, and he can do a lot of good things as well. But I just think when it comes down to it, on a third down conversion where you need to be perfect with timing and with chemistry, I don't know if Stafford and Beckham are on that level yet of chemistry. And, I could be wrong on that, but it's yet to be seen. And they'll have a chance to prove it in the playoffs as well. And then my next team was Tennessee. They're going to get a healthy Derrick Henry back. And with everything that's happened, they're in the 1 seed because of their defense. And if you told me that at the beginning of the year, I would have scoffed at you. Their defense was it wasn't terrible at the beginning of the year, but it wasn't good, I would say. And now they're a good to, at the very worst, a extremely solid defense. And they're definitely in the main picture of this AFC and how it will play out. Next team, Dallas. I mean, with the weapons they have on both sides of the ball, I just think in the biggest moments, the stars will show up big. And as a Cowboys fan, I'm kind of leaning on that to give me comfort right now because that I was not very impressed by that Cardinals performance, but it happens. Then I have the Bengals, the Bills, and then the last two teams I was kind of debating on whether or not I wanted them in, but Indy and Arizona, I think are definitely in consideration for making a run. They have had their head scratching losses here and there, but those are teams that know who they are and have the basically MVP candidate player on offense. For Colts, it's Jonathan Taylor, and for the Cardinals, it's Kyler Murray, who I think can be the difference in whether they win a playoff game or not. And the Patriots were the last team in this tier. I think you could throw them in with the Bengals of the world, but I don't know what to expect from Mac Jones right now. And they're in this tier simply because Bill Belichick, you just can't count him out. It's just like Tom Brady. I don't see them winning the Super Bowl, but if they get the right matchups and they get a team like the Bills to start out and they get some momentum, it could happen.
So we have a similar line of thinking, but I have a little bit of a different list. I condensed mine.
Okay.
I believe that in today's NFL, the really good to great teams, and who knows, we really haven't had like a great team, like one like great team that's really separated themselves from the pack yet this year. I mean, you could argue Green Bay, you could maybe argue a couple other teams at points in times, but it really hasn't been like one dominant team so far this season. So in my Super Bowl caliber teams, I believe in today's NFL, there's probably 7-8 teams that can actually like get to a Super Bowl and possibly win the Super Bowl. So my tier one was of course Green Bay, Kansas City, Tampa Bay for the obvious reasons that I mentioned. Tier two, I called Super Bowl dark horses, Super Bowl threats, call them whatever you want. Same idea as your list. I have Tennessee. They're getting healthy offensively. That's important. I believe that Ryan Tannehill has really gained traction in terms of his connection with A.J. Brown. The past couple of weeks, he's a receiver that can take over a game, I believe, with his talent. And they're getting Derrick Henry back healthy. And who knows, maybe he's not like the same 110% Derrick Henry that we saw before this injury. But if he's anything close to that, they're certainly going to be physical. They're a well-coached team. Mike Vrabel, that's proven in the fact that they're 5-2 in one-score games. Really well coached. They're top 6 in scoring defense. And guess what? It's likely that they're going to win this week, as we discussed, and they're going to lock up that first-round bye, that home field advantage throughout the playoffs. Well, guess what? 9 out of the last 10 Super Bowl teams that have made the Super Bowl, appeared in the Super Bowl, have had a first-round bye. And I know that goes back to the older format where there was only 6 teams, but it still applies. Same idea. So Tennessee, physical, they have an identity, especially when they get Derrick Henry back, and their defense is good enough to win on most Sundays. Next team is the Rams. I know there's a lot of questions about this offense. However, I always say that if you have an A coach and an A quarterback, in terms of talent and what he can do and the explosiveness of your offense, and you have talent, a really talented defense, and you can get after the opposing quarterback, that you can win a Super Bowl. And I believe the Rams have all those ingredients. Sean McVay is a great coach. They have stars on both sides of the ball that can take over a game at any point in time. Odell has been a pretty damn good addition, I would say.
Right.
Better than I expected. That dynamic is working out better than I thought. And losing Robert Woods a couple weeks ago didn't really do them any favors, because not only some of the things he does in the passing game, but also in the run game. That's what casual football fans don't understand. He was one of the more physical receivers in the league, and he, with some of those zone running schemes that the Rams like to run, he was really helpful in that. But now they don't have that. It's kind of hurt them in some areas. At some points in times, I feel like they've tried to validate trading for Matthew Stafford by airing it out a little too much and going away from the run game. They are getting a version of Cam Akers back this week. I don't know if he'll be the same. He's coming off, I believe it was an Achilles tear, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he's in record recovery time, like 5 or 6 months, which is unheard of for a Achilles injury, especially for a running back. But he'll be able to help in some form or fashion, I at least think. And the Matthew Stafford stuff, I get it. It's been sloppy at times. I think he has 4 or 5 turnovers in the past 2 or 3 games. I don't know the exact number, but what I always say with quarterbacks, and what a lot of people in the media have the same view, how good you are as a quarterback. Number one, how good are you when you're trailing? When the opposing defenses know that you have to throw the ball, that you're trailing, you're trying to get back into a game, you're trying to go win a game against a good defense. The good defenses in today's NFL. How good are you when the opposing defenses know you have to throw? Well, Matthew Stafford this year, when trailing, he completes 68% of his passes, 8.1 yards per attempt, 16 touchdowns to only 4 interceptions, and he's got a 108 quarterback rating. All those rank among the best in the league when trailing. And then in the fourth quarter, when it really matters, he's been one of the best in the league in that area as well, completing 73% of his passes, 8.3 yards per attempt, 11 touchdowns, no picks, and the highest quarterback rating in the league in the fourth quarter at 127. So we know some of these mistakes that he's been making can't happen in the playoffs if they want to go win a Super Bowl. But with how explosive they are offensively and with the coach that they have and the defense that they have, they can overcome maybe one mistake a game. Like, it's not going to absolutely kill them. And most of these mistakes that he's making, not all of them are all on him. Like, some of them are just playing bad throws that a veteran like him shouldn't make, but not every single one of them. And Sean McVay even spoke to this in his press conference. Not all of the mistakes are on him particularly. So I still think the Rams are really good. On their best day, I do think they're a tier 1 team, but they've been a little bit inconsistent, and that worries me just a bit. And Matthew Stafford is certainly a concern. And then I have Dallas. I've spoken highly of Dallas. Of course, last week isn't what you wanted. Playing at home against the Arizona Cardinals, a chance to prove that you're really legit. I still think they're legit, though. They're third in the NFL in point differential. A stat that Vegas loves to look at. When you go against the inferior opponents, are you winning those games by, are you dominating the bad teams and, beating some good teams as well? I think third in point differential. They have an aggressive, ultra-athletic defense with playmakers at all 3 levels. All 3 players could take over a game at any point in time, and they've each done it in a certain game this season. Trayvon Diggs, Micah Parsons, and DeMarcus Lawrence. You certainly have others, Randy Gregory, and others. And Dan Quinn's done a great job. The question with Dallas is just some of this offensive inconsistency, and I don't know what that what that can be attributed to. You can speak to that better than I can. But that's the main question with Dallas. On the right day, if they get the right matchup, they can beat anybody. But it's just going to come down to overcoming that sort of, I guess, I don't know if it's a psychological thing or whatever it is. But they can get the 2 seed, they can have 2 home playoff games, and they certainly have the offense on its best days that can beat anybody. So I have them in that tier. And then I have Buffalo in my Super Bowl dark horses tier number 2. Look, they're 10-6. They're in position to win the AFC East again. I have concerns about the inconsistency of their offensive line, and I do have concerns about the sloppiness at times of one Josh Allen. However, I do like the commitment that they've shown to the run in the past couple of weeks, especially with Josh Allen. They're utilizing him more in the running game, and they do have a knockout punch. They are explosive offensively with Stephon Diggs, and they do have a knockout punch. And when they win, they beat you. All 10 of their wins this year have come by 10 or more points. That's pretty incredible when you think about today's NFL, the any given Sunday type thing where any team can beat any team on really any given Sunday, and you have to come to play each and every week. And they have the league's best point differential, plus 177. So I still think they got a really good defense, a really good coach, an A quarterback, as long as he can avoid some of the mistakes that he still seems to make. And as long as they show that commitment to the running game, I think they're still a dangerous team, a team that you don't want to see in the playoffs. And that's where it really ends for me, tier number 2. I think those are the 7 teams that I believe I can picture in my head, those 7 teams winning the Super Bowl, just with the rosters they have, the quarterbacks that they have, and the pieces that the coaches that they have, guys who have been there, done that. And that's where it ends for me, but I can certainly understand. I was going back and forth with teams like Arizona and Indianapolis. I didn't have Cincinnati and the Chargers in this conversation just because I have major questions there, but we can get to that here in our next tier, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, and here's what I'll say about Cincinnati and the Chargers. I had them as like the lower level of my tier, and I definitely do like that you made like kind of tiers within the tier, which was probably what I should have done. But in my mind, I had tier 2 as teams that I could see making a run if everything kind of falls in their favor. And the reason I have Cincinnati in there is because I just think their balance offensively really lends itself to really good football in the playoffs. I have concerns about their offensive line, though. I think that's the thing. That's going to be the thing that holds them back, because if you look throughout the AFC and throughout the NFL, just in general, I mean, you see pass rushers on basically every team in the league. Even the worst teams in the league have a guy who can wreck a game. So the offensive line is going to continue to be a problem, but I just think they're good enough to overcome that in the right situations, I think.
I certainly understand. But with that, let me present to you my tier number 3. And this is really where it gets interesting. This is the teams that you're going to be seeing playing next weekend. These are the teams that we're going to be talking about next weekend, most of them, at least we think. I called this, I don't know what you want to call it, the one possibly done. Like, these teams could all win a game in the playoffs. I could see it for sure. They're all talented enough. They all have the pieces to do so. But I have a major question that's holding me back from believing that they can go any further than possibly the divisional round of the playoffs. But, it all depends on matchups, and anything can happen, and I won't be surprised by anything. However, I start this tier off with the Arizona Cardinals. We just talked about them. Kyler Murray's unbelievable. He has been for most of the season when he's been healthy. I do believe they're going to get Hopkins back eventually, and they're going to get James Conner back eventually, and they're going to get Rondale Moore back eventually, and they're going to be absolutely dangerous, a force to be reckoned with offensively once they get those weapons back. For me, it just comes down to Cliff Kingsbury. What will we see in the playoffs? He's an inexperienced coach. Kyler Murray's never been here before. They're a lot better team on the road than they are at home. I believe they finished the season 8-1 on the road, which is just unheard of in today's NFL.
Yeah.
So who will they play? Who will they match up against? It could be Dallas once again. Who knows? Depends what happens this weekend. But they do have an elite pass rusher, Chandler Jones. Their defense is solid. We'll just have to see. My major question is the inexperience in the playoffs. And it's sort of the same goes for the Bengals. I do believe they're a dangerous team. I think they can certainly win a game. And if they do, it'd be their first playoff win since 1991. That's over 30 years. The people in Cincinnati are starving for a playoff victory. They did not get one last weekend with the Bearcats. They would love for their Bengals to get a playoff win. This offense, you cannot say anything bad about this offense. I mean, the only thing you can really say is the offensive line is still sort of a rebuilding situation, and they're inconsistent at times. But for the most part, even when Joe Burrow has been pressured, he's been able to escape and make plays off script.
Right.
And this season, and I think we got to do another one of those quarterback tiers lists, whether that's after this season or at some point, because I think there's an argument to be made for where Joe Burrow fits in this equation. I think he's certainly top 12, or that's how he's played this season. But I think I said this before on our last podcast, that he at some point next year, he'll have solidified himself if he continues to play this way as a possible top 10 quarterback in the league. And I think you said you think he's already at that point. And I certainly wouldn't argue with that. He has 12 completions of over 50 yards this year. That's the most by any quarterback since 2002. Think about that. And that's more than Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Tom Brady put together this season. So this offense is very explosive. They can run the ball on their good days. I just have questions about the defense. And obviously, a first-time head coach in the playoffs. I know the defense has a good pass rush. They have good pass rushers. But as we saw, they did struggle. They have struggled when they face the better offenses in the league. And we'll just have to see how they fare come playoff time. I have the Chargers. I've talked about them at length. Justin Herbert, certainly big arm, talented guy, can make plays off script. They check that box. They check the weapons box as well. Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler. The offensive line is certainly improved. The question is on defense. Can they stop the run, and can they be good situationally? That's the historical question with this Chargers team, and we'll see. But certainly on their best days offensively, just like the Cowboys, just like a lot of these other teams, they can beat anybody. The Colts, a team I've been high on all season. It really all just comes down to Carson Wentz. What do we get from him on a given day, whether that's Saturday, Sunday, Monday? I don't know when they'll be playing. I think they're going to be in the playoffs, although I hope they aren't, for my sakes. But I've always liked their offensive line, despite some of the injuries. I love Jonathan Taylor. We've talked about him at length. He's in the MVP conversation. And their defense, as long as it's healthy, they have Darius Leonard. They have some of the main pieces on this defense. They're a well-coached veteran team for the most part. I like their chances of winning a game. Just depends on the matchup. And then New England. Look, it's Belichick. You can never count him out. You made that great point. Mac Jones hit a little bit of a wall the past couple of weeks, but he got it together against a bad team in Jacksonville at home. That's what you're supposed to do. And we'll see what he does this upcoming week against Miami. But they have an identity. They check that box. And they check the coach box. What they don't check yet is the quarterback box. We'll have to see what Mac Jones brings come playoff time. But that running game with that defense, you can certainly win a game. And who knows? Maybe they make a an extended playoff run. And they can still certainly win the division. And then I have the 49ers. Look, I've been high on them. I do think there's a chance they can win this weekend. That's why I have them here in this position. They're physical. They can run the ball. They have an experienced quarterback, given that he's healthy. And they have a pass rush defensively and a good offensive line. I believe Trent Williams is like the highest rated offensive lineman this season. And there's some statistic about how he's like only allowed like 1 or 2 pressures, I believe. So they have one of the best offensive linemen in the league, and they have a solid offensive line. They're solid in the trenches. They can run the ball. They've got an experienced coach in the playoffs. Question is with that secondary, what do I get from the secondary? But they've had injuries there. We'll see. But I certainly think, and I'll stick with it until I'm proven wrong, that they could win a playoff game if they get in. They could be a challenge for somebody. And I hate to do this to the Eagles because it's a great story. And they, they're dealing with some COVID. I'll be the first to admit that I was wrong about the Eagles this year. Man, what a surprise and what a job Nick Sirianni has done. But they're sort of in my happy to make the playoffs tier. I don't know. I just don't see it. I can't. They have an identity, but we still have questions about the coach and the quarterback. Look, if they run the ball and they play solid in the trenches, they can keep any game close. But can they win a playoff game? And it is going to be on the road. And I think it'll just all depend on the matchup. And they're dealing with all this COVID stuff right now. It's just a lot up in the air right now with the Eagles. And if the Saints were to make it, I think I put them in the same tier because just of the quarterback situation, we just don't know with that offense if it's explosive enough to get it done. And in the playoffs, you need that. So I don't know. That's sort of how my tiers shaked out. It's basically, and then I'll let you talk and we can wrap this thing up. Tier 1, it's Green Bay, Kansas City, and Tampa Bay. These are the 3 like Super Bowl caliber winning teams. You certainly can make the case for tier 2 teams like the Titans, the Rams, the Cowboys, and the Bills, as I laid out earlier. And then tier 3 is really everybody else except the Eagles and possibly the Saints if they were to get in. It may be some of these other teams like the, Ravens, Steelers, whoever else has a chance to possibly snag a playoff spot at this point. But those are my tiers. I turn the table to you.
Yeah. I'm right with you with a lot of that. I have the Saints and the Eagles in my tier 3. Those were the last 2 main teams that I see as, being a tier below just in terms of talent, just across the board, and also experience in the Eagles case.
Right.
Jalen Hurts has been really up and down, like within games and also within the entirety of the season as well. He's had great games and also stinkers. So knowing what he's going to bring you in a playoff type of situation is anybody's guess. And based on what we've seen the last few weeks, I mean, this team was tied 3-3 with the Giants, who were starting Mike Glennon, I think, that day. No,
Yep.
They started Jake Fromm that day.
Yep.
Either way, that's hard to explain for a playoff team being tied to a team as bad as the Giants. But I just think they're a tier below, and that's the bottom line. Same with the Saints. They, I think, have arguably one of the worst wide receiver cores in the NFL as it currently sits. I mean, you can make a case for where they're at with Michael Thomas, but he's not there. So working with what they have with Taysom Hill as their starter. I just don't see them winning a playoff game either.
Certainly. I mean, the tiers really don't matter at the end of the day. It's just a fun exercise that we're doing. But I certainly agree that they're at the bottom of the talent level, if you will. If you were to rank these teams based off talent, they'd be at the bottom. But that's not to say that they are not deserving of making the playoffs. I mean, certainly Philadelphia is a great story, in my opinion. Jalen Hurts has played well enough to get them here. Nick Sirianni has done a good enough job. And they certainly have an identity. And then the Saints, sort of the same thing. It's been a revolving door at quarterback, and you really can't have that in the NFL and at the same time be any sort of successful. But with their defense, how dominant it has been, and a weapon like Alvin Kamara offensively to go along with some of the things that Taysom Hill can do, I think it's an interesting conversation. But if they had Jameis Winston and maybe Michael Thomas, I think they'd be right up there with like the Super Bowl dark horses potentially. I think there's an argument to be made the way Jameis was playing at the beginning of the season. And of course, the things we know Michael Thomas can do. But that's irrelevant right now. We're excited for next week. Certainly, we're excited for this week to see what happens and how these playoff seedings shake out and what playoff matchups we're actually going to be discussing next week. But that's going to really, I guess, wrap it up for this episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast, episode 88, the first episode of 2022. Hopefully it's a great year. And if you don't have anything else to say, Amy, you can go ahead and wrap this thing up.
I'll just say it's a big day for us Mavs fans. Shout out to Dirk. I got the jersey in the background. But yeah, I'll let you finish it up.
Yeah, so I don't think of these coming in, but I guess just like Ben Roethlisberger's career after this week, we are gone.
Peace out, y'all.